I used to think losing the car was just one more reminder that, in my family, I was the one expected to sacrifice. But I never imagined that. At my grandmother's 70th birthday party, one seemingly simple question would bring down the entire lie my mother and sister had been building for years. My name is Arya Reynolds. I'm 24 years old. And 6 months ago, my mother did something that still leaves a lump in my throat whenever I think about it. She gave my SUV, the one my grandmother had gifted me for my 24th birthday, to my sister Madison. She didn't ask to borrow it. She didn't discuss it with me. She certainly didn't ask for permission. She just handed Madison the keys as if the car had never belonged to me in the first place. I can still hear my mother's voice that day. Calm, in a way that felt almost cruel. Madison needs it more. You're single, Uber is more convenient for you anyway. On the surface, it sounded like a practical decision. But to me, it was confirmation of something I had felt my entire life. Anything of mine could be taken away if my family decided my sister deserved it more. I didn't argue. I didn't cry or make a scene. I just stood there and watched my car disappear from my life. As if my presence could be erased just as easily. But it didn't stop there. Then came my grandmother Eleanor's 70th birthday party. With more than 40 relatives in attendance. I showed up in an Uber, while my SUV was parked right outside the restaurant like a deliberate insult. When Grandma asked why I wasn't driving the car she had given me, my mother smiled and repeated that exact same line in front of everyone. And in that moment, one question from my grandmother blew open every secret my family thought they could keep buried forever. To understand why the car hurt me so deeply, you have to go back to the beginning, to the years when I was still just a child in my own family. We weren't a big family. It was just my parents, my sister Madison, and me. My father was an accountant. And later my mother worked part-time in a real estate office. We lived a typical middle-class life, not poor, but never truly comfortable either. From the outside, everything looked normal, but only the people living inside that house could understand what our roles really were. Madison is 4 years older than I am. She has blonde hair, blue eyes, and the same smile as my mother. People always said the two of them looked like sisters. I took after my father's side of the family, more dark hair, quieter, more likely to observe than jump in. From a very early age, I understood that Madison was the center of everything, and I was just someone orbiting around her. If she wanted one of my toys, my mother would say, "Arya, share with your sister. You're the adaptable one." If she wanted the bigger bedroom, my mother would explain, "Madison has more friends over. You understand, don't you?" If one of her activities conflicted with one of mine was always the one that got cancelled. I grew up hearing the word flexible. But the older I got, the more I realized it was just a softer way of saying I was disposable. I was never the child who got priority. Never the one asked first. Never the one anyone felt they had to seriously consider. I was the backup plan, the one expected to give in, to be understanding, to stay quiet. By the time I was 20, I had started building a life of my own. I worked as a freelance writer, took on remote projects, and paid for my own rent, bills, living expenses, and everything else I needed so I would not have to depend on anyone. To me, that was something to be proud of. I was not wealthy, but I was independent. I earned my own money through my own skills, managed my own time, and stood on my own 2 feet. But in my mother's eyes, none of that ever counted as a real job. Every time we had dinner as a family, she would ask the same kind of question. "When are you finally going to have a proper career?" And before I could even answer, she would turn to Madison, as if to present the kind of success she had always wanted. Madison got married at 24, had Ethan at 25, and stepped neatly into the exact kind of life my mother had imagined for both of us. Meanwhile, in my mother's eyes, I was just a rough draft that had never been finished. She never saw the nights I stayed up late to meet deadlines, the contracts I had to negotiate on my own, or the months I pushed myself through pressure just to keep my life stable. She only saw me sitting at home in front of a computer and decided that it was not real work. The more I listened to her comparisons, the more I realized the problem was not what I did. The problem was that someone like me was never going to meet the standard she reserved for Madison. And when a person has always been seen as the less important version, even their belongings start to be treated like things that can be handed away without asking. In truth, the signs that I was never considered someone who mattered had appeared long before the car, about a year before Grandma Eleanor's 70th birthday party. The family started discussing the fact that she was living alone after Grandpa passed away. Everyone said they were worried, or at least that was what they claimed. My mother immediately stepped in and organized what she called a family meeting, which in reality was just her, my father, Madison, and Madison's husband Derek sitting around the dining table making every decision. I was never invited. I only found out 3 days later, after everything had already been settled. When my mother called and casually informed me that Madison would visit Grandma twice a month and Derek would handle small repairs around the house, I waited to hear what my role would be. There was nothing, I asked. What about me? I work from home. I could help too. My mother cut me off immediately in that familiar, dismissive tone. Oh, you're so busy with your computer work. Just let Madison handle it. She's better with people. I still remember the way my throat tightened when she said that. What my mother did not know was that for the previous 2 years, I had video called Grandma every Sunday afternoon. Not out of obligation. Not for a few polite minutes. We talked for hours about Grandpa. About her garden. About the books she was reading. About the kinds of things no one else in the family ever had time to listen to. One time, she looked at me through the screen and said, "You're so much like your grandfather. Arya. Quiet. But you notice everything." At the time, I just smiled and let it pass. I did not realize then that she had noticed everything too, every time my mother cut me off. Every time Madison was chosen first. Every small wound that had built up over the years into a life of being overlooked. My 24th birthday was supposed to be just another ordinary day, maybe even a disappointing one. Like most years, I had grown used to expecting nothing from my family beyond a generic card or maybe a dinner if my mother happened to remember. But that time, she called a week in advance, and there was something unusual in her voice. "Come home on Saturday," she said. "We have a gift for you." I almost said no because I assumed it was just going to be another empty gesture. But in the end, I went. When my Uber pulled up outside, everyone was already there: my father, my mother, Madison, Derek, little Ethan, and out in the driveway was a navy blue Honda CR-V with a huge red bow tied across the hood. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard that my hands shook when my mother smiled, handed me the keys, and said, "Happy birthday, Arya. We wanted you to have a more reliable way to get around." In that moment, I truly believed that maybe, for the first time in years, I had finally been seen. I remember looking over at Grandma Eleanor and seeing her standing near the garage door. The look in her eyes was not just happiness. It was something warmer, deeper, like she understood that the gift meant more to me than anyone else there possibly could. My mother added, almost casually, "Your grandmother wanted you to have this car. She thought it was time." At the time, I did not fully understand what she meant by that. To me, the car was not just transportation. It was proof that my existence carried some weight. It was the first thing that made me feel like I was not completely a shadow in my own family anymore. For the next 10 months, I drove it everywhere and built memories that felt entirely my own. And at this point, I want to say something to anyone listening to this story. If you have ever had one rare moment when you finally felt valued, comment one below. Because I know exactly how tightly a person can cling to a moment like that. I loved that car in the way people love something that is not only useful, but deeply meaningful. For 10 months, I drove it to work, to the grocery store, to visit my grandmother, and out on solitary drives whenever I needed room to breathe. Every time I held the steering wheel, I felt like I was holding a piece of my own worth in my hands. Then everything changed when Madison's car started having problems. It was 3 weeks before Grandma's 70th birthday. I had gone over to my parents' house for Sunday dinner like I usually did. Madison's minivan was still parked outside. But as I passed by the garage, I suddenly stopped cold. My navy blue Honda CR-V was sitting neatly inside. Ethan's car seat was already strapped into the back as if the vehicle had belonged to Madison all along. I walked straight into the kitchen and found my mother stirring a pot of barbecue meat, as if nothing at all was unusual. I asked, "Mom, why is my car in the garage?" She just answered lightly, "Oh, Madison's borrowing it for now. Her car is in the shop." I asked again. For how long? She stayed calm. Probably just a few days. The mechanic said about a week. I wanted to ask why no one had called me first. I wanted to ask why everyone was acting as if my ownership meant so little it did not even need to be mentioned. But just then Madison walked into the kitchen carrying Ethan. And the whole moment dissolved into baby talk and setting the table for dinner. I swallowed every question. 1 week passed. Then 2. My car still did not come back. And that was when I began to understand that this was no temporary loan at all. After 2 weeks of not seeing the car, I texted Madison to ask how the repairs on her vehicle were going, and when I could get my SUV back. Her reply came very late. Cold and dismissive in the way she always was when she did not want to explain herself. The mechanic says it'll be another week. Thanks for understanding. I stared at the message and felt heat rush to my face. Understanding I had never said I agreed. I had never even been asked. I called my mother right away. The moment she picked up, I asked directly, "When am I getting my car back?" Her tone changed immediately. It was no longer gentle. It turned hard and cold. "Arya, stop making this difficult. Madison has a small child. She needs a reliable car. You work from home. You can use Uber." I said, "That's not the point. It's my car." My mother let out a sigh as if I were the one being childish. "It's just a car. Don't be so materialistic." I gripped my phone so tightly that my hand started to hurt. The issue had never been material things. The issue was that it was mine. And all of them believed they could take it and still expect me to be polite about it. I called Madison the next day. She answered while Ethan was crying somewhere in the background. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Mads, I need my car back." She paused for a second, then said, "Mom told me I could use it. I thought you were okay with it." I choked on the words. "No one asked me." Her voice sharpened with irritation. "Arya, do you have any idea how hard it is to raise a child? You don't actually need the car as much as you think you do." I almost laughed from sheer anger. They were not just taking my belongings. They were deciding for me what I was allowed to need in my own life. And in that moment, I realized that if I stayed silent, this would keep happening forever. That night I sat alone in my apartment, with the Uber app still open on my phone and my thoughts tied in knots. The more I thought about it, the more I understood that this had never really been only about the car. If today they could take my car because Madison needed it more, then tomorrow it could be my time, my money, my effort, even my choices about how to live my own life. I had spent years being called flexible. Years playing the role of the understanding one. Years stepping aside before anyone even had to ask. But my silence had never made them value me more. It had only taught them that I was the easiest person to take from. At that point, I told myself I was not going to make a scene. I did not want a war. I just wanted one honest conversation. I decided I would speak to my mother at my grandmother's birthday party. Privately and calmly. Like an adult. I would explain how I felt. Tell her where my boundaries were. And ask for the car to be returned. I was still naive enough to think that if I spoke reasonably, everything could be resolved. What I did not know was that my mother had already moved first. She had no intention of having a private conversation. She was preparing to turn the whole thing into a public performance. One where I would once again be cast as the good daughter who should sacrifice for her sister. That was how my family had always worked. They made decisions for me. Told the story for me. And then expected me to smile and go along with it. But this time, they made one very big mistake. They thought I would stay silent. They did not know my grandmother had been watching. And they had no idea that she already had an answer prepared for every one of their lives. The day of Grandma Eleanor's 70th birthday was one of those beautiful autumn days that almost felt offensive. The sky was clear. The sunlight was soft. The kind of weather that should have made people feel calm. But inside, all I felt was a quiet heaviness I could not shake. The party was held at Rosewood, an upscale restaurant with white tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, and waiters who moved so smoothly they barely seemed to touch the ground. I arrived in an Uber, wearing my favorite teal dress, and took a deep breath before stepping inside. Then I saw it. My SUV was parked right near the entrance. Spotless and familiar. But now there was a baby on board sticker on the back, one I had never bought. It was like someone had attached a whole different life to it and turned it into a car for someone else's family. Madison and Derek had just gotten out. Derek was carrying Ethan, who was fussing over the little bow at his collar. Madison spotted me and waved cheerfully. "Arya, you look beautiful. Did you take an Uber?" I forced a smile, as thin and fragile as glass. Yeah. It was easier. She either did not hear the bitterness in my voice, or she heard it and did not care. They went inside first, leaving me standing there for a few seconds in the parking lot, staring at my own car like it was a piece of my life someone else had claimed. I ran my hand lightly along the side of it, feeling anger, hurt, and determination all at once. I told myself, tonight, I'm going to say something. I'm not going to let this slide again. So I walked into the restaurant, not knowing that inside, my mother had already been telling plenty of people the story of my generosity. At first, the party felt fairly normal. Grandma sat at the center of the room, elegant in a dark blue dress, her back straight, her silver hair neatly styled. She looked like the only person in the room who truly controlled the atmosphere around her. I was seated near the end of the table. Beside a few cousins, I barely saw the usual place for me in the family present. But never important. People raised their glasses, shared old stories, laughed, and made conversation. I quietly answered the usual polite questions. Then, just as the main course was being served, Grandma turned to me and asked in a completely natural voice, "Arya, why didn't you drive the lovely car I gave you today?" The whole table seemed to pause, and before I could even open my mouth, my mother was faster. She smiled brightly. The kind of smile that would look proud to anyone who did not know the truth. "Oh, Arya gave that car to Madison. Mom, Madison has little Ethan. So she needed a more reliable vehicle. Arya is so understanding, she knows her sister needs it more." Around me, I heard soft sounds of approval. That's so sweet. That's what sisters are for, looking out for each other. I sat there frozen, my fork in my hand, unable to lift it. My mother had taken my car. And now she was taking the truth too. She had turned me into a supporting character in a beautiful story she had made up herself. And in that moment, I understood something clearly if I did not speak for myself. No one else ever would. And by the way, if you've made it this far and this story is making you angry on my behalf, go ahead and like the video. Honestly, sometimes just knowing someone understands what it feels like to be spoken for, to have decisions made for you, can make you feel a lot less alone. After my mother finished speaking, the whole room seemed to wait for me to confirm her version of the story. Grandma was still looking at me without taking her eyes off me. Her expression was not soft in a comforting way. It was calm and sharp, so steady that it made me feel, for the first time, that I could lean on it. Then she asked again, slowly, "Did you really give the car to your sister, Arya?" She paused for a beat, then added a question that silenced the entire table. "Or did someone take it from you?" My heart was pounding so hard that my ears started ringing. My mother gave a strained little laugh and tried to cut in. "Mom, it's just a small family matter." But Grandma did not look at her. She only looked at me. For the first time in many years, I felt like someone was truly waiting for my answer, not waiting for me to say whatever would make things easier. I swallowed hard. I looked at my mother and saw that familiar warning in her eyes. I looked at Madison and saw that she had gone completely still. Then I looked back at Grandma and said, my voice shaking at first, "No one asked me. I was only told Madison was borrowing it for 1 week. It's been 3 weeks. And I still haven't gotten it back." I paused, then said the part that hurt the most. "Mom said Madison needed it more because she has a family. And since I'm single, I'm supposed to be flexible." That one sentence changed the entire atmosphere in the room. The relatives who had just been nodding and praising me for being generous were now exchanging uncomfortable looks. My mother pushed back her chair and stood up, trying to brush it aside. "It's just a small misunderstanding, but I already knew everything had changed. I had told the truth. And once the truth enters the room, lies do not stay standing for very long." My mother immediately tried to take control again. She stood up so quickly that her chair scraped hard against the wooden floor, then said in a falsely soothing voice that this was just a small family issue and did not need to be turned into a spectacle in front of relatives. But Grandma Eleanor did not back down. She set her fork down very slowly, then turned fully toward my mother. I had never seen her like that before. She was no longer the gentle grandmother who liked talking about gardening. She looked like a woman shaped by a lifetime of experience, calm to the point of coldness, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Then she asked my mother, "Do you remember what you came to ask me for before Arya's birthday last year?" My mother's face lost all color at once. She stammered, "Mom." This is not the time. Grandma cut her off. "No. This is exactly the time." The whole room went silent. I looked around and saw my aunts and uncles sitting up straighter, realizing that something much bigger than an argument over a car was starting to come out. Grandma continued, her voice clear and deliberate with every word. "You came to me and asked for money from the family fund to buy Arya a car. You said you wanted to do something special for her, so she would know that she mattered too." I nearly stopped breathing. My mother stood frozen, while quiet whispers began to spread around the table. I saw Derek staring down, and Madison fixed her eyes on her napkin. Grandma did not stop there. She reminded everyone that my mother had promised the car would belong to me. Me alone. In my mind, all the scattered pieces suddenly started falling into place. The car had never been a gift born from my mother's long-delayed sense of fairness. From the beginning, it had been Grandma's decision, and more importantly, she had not given it away blindly. I thought the biggest shock of that night was discovering that Grandma was the one who had actually paid for the car. I was wrong. She looked straight at my mother and said the next words in a voice sharp as a blade. The title to that car is in my name. Linda. Not yours. Not Arya's. Mine. The entire room seemed to stop breathing. Before I could even fully grasp what that meant, she continued, because I know exactly how you behave. And I was not going to leave any room for this. Then she explained that my mother had signed a written agreement, stating everything clearly. The car had been purchased with money from the family fund that Grandma had authorized. It was intended exclusively for me. And it could not be sold, transferred, loaned out, or given to anyone else without my written consent. The words sent a chill straight down my spine. She had known. She had known there was a real possibility my mother would do something like this. So she had prepared for it in advance. Part of me hurt at that realization. Because it meant the favoritism in my family had been obvious enough that Grandma felt the need to protect me with black and white legal language. But another part of me felt protected in a way I had never been protected before. My mother stammered that it was all just procedure. Just paperwork for the fund. Nothing serious. But her voice had gone weak. And everyone could hear it. I turned to look at Madison. She had started crying, insisting she had not known. That Mom had told her. I agreed. But Grandma did not let her hide behind ignorance. She asked, "Did you call Arya and ask? Did you even send your sister one message to see whether she agreed?" Madison froze. The answer was no, and that truth stood plainly in front of everyone. My mother had orchestrated it. But my sister had also benefited from it without caring enough to ask whether I had ever said yes. When Grandma told Uncle Robert to bring out what she had asked him to prepare, I saw my mother change completely. All of her confidence vanished, replaced by a raw kind of panic. Uncle Robert bent down under the table and pulled out a yellow file envelope. It looked completely ordinary. But the way my mother stared at it told me that whatever was inside could tear apart every story she had just tried to build. Grandma opened the envelope very slowly, as if she wanted to give my mother enough time to feel the pressure tightening around her. On the white tablecloth, she laid out each set of papers in neat order. Then she asked Uncle Robert to read them aloud. The first document was the vehicle registration. The owner's name was clearly listed, Eleanor Mitchell. I heard several sharp intakes of breath around the table. My mother immediately argued that it was only done that way for convenience. But her voice was shaking now, and no one really believed her anymore. The second document was the disbursement agreement from the family fund. Uncle Robert read it line by line. $28,000 had been released to purchase a car as a birthday gift for Arya Reynolds. The car was for Arya's sole use. It could not be transferred to any other family member without Arya's written consent. My mother's signature sat at the bottom of the page, clear in a way that felt almost brutal. The room went silent as a graveyard. No one needed to argue anymore. The proof was right there. This was no longer a matter of conflicting stories, no longer a misunderstanding. It was paperwork. It was an agreement. It was the truth. My mother had known exactly who that car belonged to. And she had still given it to my sister, then turned the whole thing into a touching story about my sacrifice in front of the entire family. But Grandma still was not finished. She pulled out another sheet of paper. This time, a handwritten letter that had already yellowed slightly with age. As Uncle Robert read it aloud, I felt as if someone had wrapped a hand around my chest and squeezed. In the letter, my mother had written, in her own handwriting, that she understood I had often felt overlooked in the family. That she wanted this gift to show me that I mattered too. And that she promised she would never take the car away from me, or let anyone else use it without my consent. It was my mother's writing. That realization hurt more than any direct insult ever could, because it meant my mother's favoritism was not unconscious. She knew. She knew I had been hurt. Overlooked. made to live like a shadow. And she still chose to do it all over again the moment it became convenient for Madison. I looked at her and no longer felt shock. What I felt instead was a disappointment too clear and too heavy to deny. Madison broke into louder sobs and turned to me, saying she truly had not known. That Mom had told her I had agreed. I believed she had not known the full truth about the paperwork. But for the first time, I also saw clearly what Grandma wanted everyone in that room to understand. Madison had grown used to benefiting from not asking questions. She never had to make sure I was okay with anything, because everything had always flowed in her direction. All she had to do was accept it. And I was the one expected to absorb it. Grandma was right. This was not about a car anymore. It was about the way my whole family functioned. It was about how the person who spoke the loudest was treated as the one who mattered most, while the person who endured things quietly was assumed not to hurt at all. And that night, that entire system was collapsing in front of everyone. After all the documents and all the indirect confessions, Grandma stood up. Her posture was perfectly straight, steady enough that the whole room seemed to fall silent on its own. Her voice was not loud, but every word landed like an order. The car will be returned to Arya tonight, before anyone leaves this restaurant. My mother was the first to object. She said Madison needed the car, that Ethan needed rides to school and doctor's appointments, as if those needs somehow made everything acceptable. But Grandma cut her off immediately. Madison is an adult. She can solve her transportation problems the way everyone else does. Then she turned to my sister and said just 2 words. Madison? The keys. I looked at her, half expecting her to argue, half expecting more tears. But in the end, her hands only trembled as she opened her purse and took out the keyring with the small silver compass charm I had bought at a flea market right after I got the car. Just seeing it made my throat tighten. She stepped in front of me, placed the keys in my palm, and said, almost in a whisper, I'm sorry, Arya. The keys were still warm from being in her bag all evening. But the moment they touched my hand, I felt something inside me settle back into place. Ownership, dignity, the sense that I was not completely powerless after all. All I could manage to say was, thank you. Not because I had forgiven her in that moment, but because I no longer had the strength to say anything more. But Grandma was still not about to let it end that easily. She turned to my mother and said that she still owed me a real apology. And for the first time in my life, I saw my mother with nowhere left to hide. My mother's apology, if it could even be called that, sounded so dry and strained that it was almost meaningless. She stood there, face flushed, unable to look me in the eye, and said, Arya, I'm sorry. I should have asked you before letting Madison use the car. That was it. No mention of the lie she had told in front of the whole family. No mention of the fact that she had taken my car for 3 weeks. No mention of the way she had made me feel invisible not just that night, but for years. Grandma immediately pointed that out. But in that moment, I realized something very clearly. I no longer needed a perfect apology from my mother. I needed something bigger. I needed a boundary she would never be allowed to cross again. I stood up, still gripping the keys in my hand, and said as calmly as I could, I accept your apology, but from now on, any decision involving me, my property, or my life has to be discussed directly with me. Not through Madison. Not through Dad. Me. For a second, I saw a flicker of relief cross my mother's face until I continued. You do not get to make decisions for me anymore. I am not the flexible one. I am not the backup plan. I am your daughter. And I deserve to be asked. The entire room went silent. No one interrupted. No one laughed it off. No one said I was overreacting. And then I heard Grandma say softly, but clearly enough for everyone to hear, That's my granddaughter. I turned to look at her. And for the first time in 24 years, I felt that my place in this family was no longer something that could be erased so easily. I thought that would be the end of it after getting my keys back and drawing my line in the sand. But once again, Grandma Eleanor proved that she was not just dealing with the car. She was confronting the very system that had made something like this possible in the first place. While the room was still reeling, she calmly announced that the way the Mitchell family fund would operate was going to change from that point on. Before then, as everyone knew, requests for support had usually gone through her children, my mother, Uncle Robert, and Aunt Patricia. They would speak on behalf of their own children when money was needed for tuition, vehicles, or other major expenses. On the surface, it sounded reasonable, but Grandma said very clearly that this system had given parents too much power to decide who was worthy, who mattered, and who should be prioritized. And she would not tolerate that anymore. She looked directly at each grandchild in the room, then said, "From now on, I will deal directly with my grandchildren. No parents, no intermediaries." I could see that it hit my mother like a second slap. For her, this was not just about losing control over the family fund. It was about losing her role as the gatekeeper, the person who got to decide who received help and who had to wait. Grandma went on to say that she had watched long enough to see how favoritism had seeped into important decisions. I looked around and realized I was not the only one affected by what she had just said. My cousins were sitting up straighter too, as if for the first time they could see a door opening for themselves as well. In that moment, I understood that Grandma was doing something bigger than protecting me. She was giving an entire generation its voice back, one that had always been forced to pass through the filter of their parents. After the party, everything in my family fell into a kind of silence that felt deeply uncomfortable. No one officially declared war, but no one could pretend nothing had happened either. My mother and father left the restaurant early that night, barely saying goodbye to anyone. Madison and Derek followed not long after, with Ethan asleep on his father's shoulder. As she passed me at the door, Madison looked back and mouthed, "I'm sorry." I only nodded. I had not forgiven her. But for the first time, she was not acting as if I was supposed to simply understand and move on. Out in the parking lot, Aunt Patricia hugged me tightly and told me I had done the right thing. Uncle Robert joked that I had officially joined the Not the Favorite Child Club. And for the first time that night, I laughed for real. 2 weeks later, my mother called me. I answered after 3 rings, still holding on to a small, foolish hope that maybe she finally wanted to talk about what had happened. But no. Within a few minutes, I realized the real reason for the call was that she wanted to find out how Grandma planned to divide the family fund among the grandchildren. I hung up on her in the middle of the conversation. It was the first time I had ever done that without feeling guilty. A month later, Madison texted and asked me to meet for coffee. This time, the meeting felt completely different. She looked tired. No perfect makeup. No easy confidence. No attitude that said she naturally deserved more. She told me she had been thinking a lot, and that she had been prioritized for so long that she had gotten used to receiving without ever asking questions. I did not open my heart right away. But for the first time, I could see that she was truly trying to look at me as my own person, not just as a supporting piece in her life. It was not healing yet, but it was the beginning of a new truth. 6 months after that party, I realized my life had changed not because I got the car back, but because I no longer saw myself through the same old eyes. Every Sunday afternoon, I drive my SUV, with the little silver compass keychain back where it belongs, to Grandma Eleanor's house. There are no more secret phone calls like before. No more feeling that I have to quietly protect the only relationship in my life where I am truly seen. We sit in the kitchen drinking tea, or out in the garden while she tells me stories about Grandpa, about her youth, about a time when she too had once been the flexible one in the family. One day, she said, "Your grandfather was the first person who truly saw me. He used to tell me I was wasting myself by constantly making myself smaller so other people could feel comfortable." Listening to her felt like hearing my own life spoken back to me. I had spent too many years believing that keeping the peace meant shrinking myself, giving things up, and making sure I never inconvenienced anyone. But Grandma taught me that being flexible does not mean being invisible. Being gentle does not mean letting people cross your boundaries. Now I am 25 years old. I have my own apartment, my own job, my own car, and most importantly, my own voice. My mother is still complicated. My sister and I are still learning how to be more honest with each other. My father still chooses to stand in the middle, just as he always has. But I am no longer living in the hope that they will change first. I understand now that I have the right to be asked. I have the right to say no. I have the right to take up space in my own life. I am no longer the flexible one they could so easily sacrifice. I am Arya. And this time, I will never make myself smaller again. If this story spoke to you, if you have also been the person who was always expected to be understanding, to give in, to stay quiet so the family could stay comfortable, then remember this. You have every right to set boundaries for yourself. And if you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and come with me into the next videos.